we can exchange our opinion for the business situation between Japan and Britain.
And you guys, you work in Horizon's area or within METI? You work with Oda-san, Horizon, these people?
They are in charge of the nuclear policy, and
Okay.
I'm in charge of the general policy, like energy outlook or something.
Okay, broader.
Yeah, but Mr. Oda is in charge of international policy, international policy, but we are
Domestic.
domestic.
Okay.
So as we sent to questionnaire
Yes.
before, our interest is since the greatest Japan earthquake, so nuclear operators in Japan have a risk that operation is stopped due to the regulatory changing. But we think we need to construct the nuclear power plant any day in the future. It's just an unofficial, but our division of nuclear energy. So we need to do so. And the biggest problem is uncertainty for business situation for the operators, since after the Fukushima accident, the regulation change and all reactors are stopped. It was a kind of beyond of low regulation, just for politically stopped. So we cannot foresee whether we can go operate the nuclear energy or not. So that is a very big problem. So it is so if we can share your effort for the nuclear energy plant construction. So that's a very happy thing for us.
Yeah.
In order to build the nuclear power in Japan, so we need take a risk. And at the same time, we push the companies to take a risk.
Yeah.
At the same time, so the CFD scheme is I'm so interested. We are so interested. So
And at the moment, in Japan, the nuclear power plants are built by the utilities. Is this right? And it's still a regulated power market in Japan. Is this how it works?
No, not about nuclear power.
Okay.
But do you mean in terms of electricity prices?
Yeah.
So the electricity prices are regulated?
Only about the nuclear, new renewable energy. So
We don't have any.
feed-in tariff scheme.
Oh, okay. Just for.
Just renewable energy. So not for nuclear power. So what will you do? What will we do? So
We are under the process of liberalization of electricity market. So
what is most useful? Should we give you some background to the CFD? How familiar are you with the CFD instrument? Would it be useful to provide some background?
Yeah, it is. I understand the difference between feed-in tariff and CFD is imbalance risk or something like that. So, sorry, I'm not sure. So we know the scheme of the CFD. So, you set the strike price and compensate the difference between the market price and the strike price.
But it's useful Alex is our expert on CFDs. Maybe a little bit on the risk allocation, because even with the CFD, there is some risks that are borne by the developers, some risks that are borne by energy consumers.
Yeah, so very happy to do that. So I think as you know, the CFD was brought in to replace the renewables obligation in the UK, which wasn't quite a feed-in tariff, it was a bit different from feed-in tariff. So in the UK, the renewables obligation was a bit like a premium feed-in tariff. So the generators would get a fixed top-up, a fixed amount of money for each megawatt hour they generate. They would also get the market price, and so they still had exposure to market price change. And they still had imbalance risk in the renewable obligation. So it's different from. We also have a feed-in tariff for very small generators, but where there's no imbalance risk. But the renewables obligation, the generator sold their power in the market. They took the market price. They took imbalance risk. So they got a premium on top of that, essentially. And as you know, the CFD was designed to take away that price, the long-term price risk. So the price is stable, whatever happens to market prices. But the generator still has to sell their power in the market. They try and maximise the price they get for that power, and they take imbalance risk and all the other risks associated with that. So the top-up is from a market reference price, not the actual market price the generator sells their power for. And we use an index so that for different technologies you have a different reference price. For a technology like nuclear power, which is baseload technology, the reference price is a season ahead price, so one for the winter and one for the summer, and it's set according to a basket of different indices. So again, there's a risk for the generator that they can choose to sell their power however they like. They may be able to do better than the reference price, or maybe they will do worse than the reference price, but they take that risk. And so that's the kind of the very fundamental level how it works. Because the generator gets this price stability for a long period of time, we also recognise that they're vulnerable to change in law risk, because for other generators in the market, if the law changes and it increases their costs, they can sell, the price of power might go up, and they will recoup that money. But because of the CFD, your price is stable, and there was no ability to pass through changes in law changes in costs that the generator incurs. So quite a lot of the CFD, and this applies to the renewable CFD and the nuclear CFD, quite a lot of it is providing protection for changes in costs. But we also want to limit that protection, because we don't want to protect the generators from risks that everyone else in the market is taking. And we don't want to take away incentives from the generators to operate their plants efficiently and to minimise the costs of any changes. So the change in law protection is very narrow, qualifying, and so that was deliberately to mean that you only get protection if the change in law is really targeted at your facility or that particular technology, or people with CFDs. So that's really the way the change in law works. So it means that if it's a general change in law that affects everyone, you won't get any protection. If it's a change in law that is targeted at your particular project, or if there was all nuclear reactors, for example, then you'd have protection. So I think you were particularly interested in the shutdown protection, which is, so there are two sorts of shutdown protection for the nuclear projects. One is where it shuts down because of a change in law, and then there's protection if it is a qualifying change in law only. So only if the change in law was targeted at that technology or that facility, or similar technologies to that. And only if the generator has to do everything that they can, everything in their power to mitigate the effects of the shutdown or the change in law, comply with, if they can carry on operating and by making changes, then they need to do everything they can to mitigate that, the cost and the effect. But if it would cost more to shut down, so it would cost more to make if the change in law requires changes to the facility, like if you said all nuclear power plants have to be able to withstand an earthquake bigger than magnitude 9, and that would cost an operator a huge amount of money, then instead they could shut down and be compensated for the costs. And I'll come on to that in a second. So there's a kind of there's a effective shutdown where the change in law doesn't say you have to shut down your plant, but it says you have to your plant has to be safe in this way. And if the costs are, if that costs more than it would cost, I'm just checking. Yes, if the cost would be greater than the cost of the compensation for shutdown, then the plant could shut down and be paid compensation instead. And then there's another sort of protection for shutdown where it is not because of a change in law, but because of a political direction. So if the government just says, we want you to shut your plant down, or other authorities insist that the plant is shut down, but without something that is a change in law, there can also be protection because there's concern around the kind of political interference, if you like, in the market. So again, you can get compensation there, but only if the change in law was not objectively justifiable. So you would not get compensated if there was a shutdown because, for example, it was objectively required because of concerns around nuclear safety. It's quite a high test to get compensation there. It's to protect against shutdown, a political direction shutdown which is not justifiable. There isn't an objective reason why, reasons of nuclear safety or environmental protection, this plant has to be shut down.
Last year in Japan, there are judgments that stop the nuclear power plant, but it was in operation.
Yeah.
And how do you think if there is the same case in UK, do you think do you think you can apply CFD to that cases?
The ones in Japan, I suppose, are a bit unusual now. So I guess one of the main examples when the CFD was being designed was after Fukushima. For example, in Germany, the nuclear power was not shut down. It was a very political thing. I guess in Japan at the moment, you have the challenge of restarts happening, and then they're being disputed in the local courts, as I understand it.
Yeah.
So that's probably slightly unusual versus the CFD as we see it.
I think the question would be asked on the CFD, was it objectively justifiable to shut down according to the list of reasons here? So I suspect if it was just a blanket order, all nuclear power plants would shut, and I'm not telling you why, then I think there would be compensation. But I think if it was a reason, in each case there's a good reason to shut down, so let's say the government decided, actually we don't think these plants are safe, we have a good reason to think they're safe because of the Fukushima incident. If that was justifiable, then I think they would not get compensated. So it would be a test of how justifiable it was. But in the UK law, it would probably, I suspect the nuclear operators would challenge it and they would say, my plant, for example, is safe. Here's all the evidence that our plant would be safe, even if there was a tsunami of the same
Mhm.
magnitude. And so I think it would all be around, is it objectively justifiable? You know,